hi, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. And we have lots to talk about. Royal recipe traditions is the topic that we have, but I think we can go a little off topic if we want to. And so I thought I would start by asking both of you, what do royal recipe traditions mean to you? How do you see these historic recipes as a way of preserving your family's heritage, your national heritage, and your cultural heritage? Can you tell us, Rohini, would you like to start?
Thank you, Meru. Thank you. Let me thank everyone. And
I think we can't hear you. Is your mic on? Can you hear her? Just try put it a little closer.
Hello? Is it on? Okay. Thank you, Meru, for the question. And let me thank Jaipur Literary Festival protagonists and the organizers for putting together this beautiful show. I've never been to anything of large multitude which is so beautifully organized. Okay, Meru, to come to your question with royal recipes and, my closeness and my association with them, having been born in an aristocratic family in India and married into the erstwhile Rana family of Nepal, who were the de facto rulers for about 104 years, I've been closely associated with this because you're born with it in your, it's ghar ka khana, you're growing up with it every day. And I think it's very important. As I was growing up, I found it was really important to hang on to these old traditions and try to preserve them because, that is, I think, most important in today's fast-changing world of culinary, fast food that's happening these days and the bad dietary so I think practices. So I think it's very important to preserve our culinary heritage and literature, and mine has been through the conduit of food. Thank you.
Thank you. Fiona, would you like to tell us?
Well, again, thank you for asking me to be here this morning. The book I've written talks about one particular royal weekend.
I think you're all familiar with this house.
But actually, what I decided to do was there's a little expression which Maggie Smith, Dowager Lady Grantham, used about what is a weekend. So that was what I turned around to think about and convene 4 weekends, of which on one weekend, my predecessors welcomed the Prince of Wales, who became Edward VII, to Highclere Castle. And in any weekend, it's what's for supper, what are you going to eat, what's for dinner, what's for lunch. And then to try to research into finding out the recipes and what the menus were. So that was my way into it, because menus, cooking, food, that's at the heart of human life. That's what we all do together, and I have been eating very well over here. So that was my starting point. And you saw on Downton Abbey in the first film, there was a royal visit, and again, it was all about the food and the cooking and what Mrs. Patmore did or not. But in real life, I thoroughly enjoyed sharing the story of welcoming the man who became Edward VII. He was Prince of Wales at the time, and at the time, I suppose, Emperor of India. So it was a different world, but it was a heck of a weekend.
Thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about the process of researching these recipes? You just said right now, going down the rabbit hole of doing the research for both of you, the point when you realize that something which is part of your everyday life is actually a part of a larger history, going into that, finding the people who held on to these recipes. Can you tell the audience a little bit about that process and the interesting people you met and maybe the wrong turns you took at some point?
Okay, Meru. So it started for me early because my parents, I think, were one of the first aristocracies in India, 1960, who turned our summer palace into a hotel. And, I absorbed my mother, following her around kitchens while she would be curating menus, giving orders to the staff of laying out tables, getting the decorations right, anything that goes as a part of hospitality. And then, as luck would have it, I got married into this total gourmand family, the Ranas of Nepal, who are famous for their rich and culturally heritage. The cuisine is reflecting their culture and their heritage, which they've borrowed a lot from, I think, the architecture, the administration, was borrowed a lot from Europe and England, thanks to Jang Bahadur, who was the first Rana Prime Minister on one of his first journeys. And then the cuisine somehow didn't come from so far off. We were influenced by India and Awadh when Jang Bahadur lent his troops to the British during the 1857 mutiny. So that was the cultural influence. The Khansamas came back with the Lucknow loot, you know. So the food was a little influenced from there. And I think my husband's nanny is the one who's taught me anything I know about Nepali cooking. Since I was Indian, married into Nepal, so she taught me, Chinya Champa Didi, her name was, and she taught me whatever I know about Nepali cooking. And so, you know, researching these recipes, out of my 136 recipes in my first book, 100 are from home, what we ate on an everyday basis. And then I realized I needed to make this book a little more inclusive of the other Rana families. So there were 9 Rana prime ministers in their 104 years rule of reign. So I went out to the families and I contacted people. Some were very reticent and didn't really want to share their recipes with me, while others were really, you know, welcoming me with open arms, giving me all their secrets, lending me their tableware, giving me their recipes. So this research period was very, very interesting. I came in contact with a lot of very interesting people and managed to document a lot of recipes which might be dead today. Thank you.
Thank you. What about you, Fiona? How did you, start, where do you start researching such a large slice of history?
Well, I started in the archives. There's 2 or 3 muniment rooms at Highclere, which I think are our pot of gold. And trying to find recipes or little notes from housekeepers or scribbles, anything like that, which are just a little treasure, basically. I was also reading the sorts of foods that would also have been cooked. Everything was cooked. There were obviously no microwaves until today, and we still cook everything without microwaves at home. So it was making the jus, making the broths, cooking everything from scratch, which again we still do. So there is a tradition of cooking which is handed down. And I think cooking is about memories, isn't it? It's about memories of your parents and your grandparents, and dishes recall a certain moment in time, maybe when you were very happy at a beach holiday or something else. So cooking is really important to make notes about it and just remember. The dishes cooked around when Edward VII came were very elaborate. He was renowned for being probably as wide as he was tall, if that's one way of putting it. And he wanted even a late night snack of food. And breakfast was gargantuan. But it was fun trying to lay it all out. And my predecessor who welcomed him, do you know she was 19 years old? So think of your children or grandchildren who were 19. And for a weekend, they welcomed someone who was going to be King of England. You know, it was when England had a larger role on the world stage. So he was a really important person. She turned to her father to help pull it off. And it must have been quite terrifying. And she shipped down trainloads of chefs from the Savoy Hotel. She just did everything to excess, so there was spare of everything. And it's just so funny when you read through. You could see the panic stations when you order 20 chickens and you've only got 12 people for supper. But it was just spare of everything as backup. So I loved that and imagining what it must have been like to have been her at the time. And we've been lucky enough to welcome the current royal family to Highclere. There was, again, this complete sense of panic and things going wrong. But I was much older than her, so had a little bit more experience. So it's the human touches, isn't it? The telling of the stories. And then it's about what you're going to cook that they will like to eat. So they are at the center of the menus that you're creating. And you're trying not to get it wrong. So that was my options. And you're not going to cook everything. I've got a recipe for an ox head from 1812. Do you know what? I'm just not going to go there. I found it really interesting, but that's just not going to be part of what I'm even going to write about. It's just slightly beyond my ken. But other of the broths and some of the very good soup bases, we still make today. And it was a very good task of writing everything down. Because who amongst you writes handwritten notes today? As a researcher, historian, I've written many books about history as well as this one. And I'm so grateful to see someone's letter. And you see their writing, you know, dear Poppet or something. And you can see the state of their mind. You get a feel of the person from the handwriting. And I don't think anyone's going to be able to read my illegible texts, which may well be misspelled. And I'm not quite sure what our successors will think of the way we've kept records of what we've done or what we ought not to have done in today's world. So whenever you're writing a book, I think there's such an interesting process to go through. And then as the deadline approaches, the process becomes less interesting and more panicking. But yes.
Well, thank you. We've talked about history and we've talked about tradition. Now let's talk about the food. So what I'm going to ask the two of you to do is describe the food for our audience, because I'm sure you're all thinking, that's all great, but what is everybody eating? So what is breakfast, lunch, and dinner in Rana cooking? And also for you, for the Highclere tradition, what is maybe not a typical day, but one of these weekends that you talked about, what would people have eaten for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and of course a late night snack? I'm very interested in the late night snack.
Okay, so with Nepal and the Ranas, food synonymous to Nepal is dal bhat tarkari. Dal is lentils, bhat is rice, and vegetables and meat. So with the Ranas, in Nepal, no one really eats breakfast because they have lunch at 9:30, 10 in the morning, which when I was a new bride and just got married, I looked under the table at my watch and I said, what happened to breakfast here? I've missed out on it. 9:30 comes this huge, beautiful silver it's called a chapri in Nepal and a thali here in India, and was full with a mound of rice with lentils, vegetables, 2-3 types of fresh vegetables, meat preparation, pickles, fresh pickles, old pickles, yogurt, sweetmeats, all at 9:30, 10 in the morning. And I looked at everyone. No one had explained to me that we don't have breakfast. And that used to be my best meal back home. So I was saying, oh my God, this is really a different way of, existing now for me. But that's what happens in Nepal. You have lunch at 9:30, 10, and then you go to office, and office is from 10 to 5. So you have a midday meal, which is called khaja or khanikura in the Rana households, at 3 o'clock. And that would consist of beaten rice, again vegetables, again meat, if you could afford it. And, you'd get your sweet meats like julfi, which is jalebi, swari, which is puri, other type of vegetables, all going for the 3 o'clock meal. And then dinner would be at 7:30. And because they're a very traditional, ritualistic family at that time, things have really changed and no one follows these customs really. But, if you had a meal cooked with rice, you would be sitting down in the kitchen. The kitchens were quite nice, actually, with marble flooring and all. So you would be sitting down on a wooden, pirka is called a little stool, with a wooden stool in front of you, and be served in these chandika thals by a Brahmin lady or gentleman or a person of your own caste. So they were really particular about that. You couldn't have rice cooked by anyone else of a different caste. Well, all that has changed now, but those were the traditional type of meals that were served in the old Rana palaces. The tea time snack could be had anywhere, and if you were not having rice again for dinner, which you had to go down to the kitchen again, if you were having rotis and puris and, again, vegetables and meat, you could have it wherever you wanted. So those were the traditional meals prepared then. No one snacked. No one really snacked.
There's no time to snack between all
with these 3 enormous meals. And the emphasis would be on fresh vegetables, on fresh food, so the vegetables, anything that was seasonal, nothing out of seasonal was ever prepared, So the thing was, you ate, they had these big kitchen gardens in each palace, so the produce would come from off the land, the cows were there, so, the meat would be there, the goats would be there, so, and then, of course, the wild boars and, all the jungle fowl that went with it. So all was homegrown, in-house, nothing really coming from outside. So that's basically in short, the typical
It's
description
good
of
we're
a Rana
having
meal.
this session just before lunch because I'm sure everybody must be getting hungry just listening to you.
Yeah, sure.
Fiona.
Well, I think the similarity is that there was no, until for the last 50 years, before that, all our ancestors didn't have Sainsbury's or Walmarts or Waitrose. We did, of course, live from the land. So similarly, Highclere Castle had a large kitchen garden. And in medieval times, it also had an orchard and a herbery, and we've also got records of a kitchen garden that was there in 1216, so 1,000 years ago. So what's really important is what you grew and how you then cured it or looked after it so you could make it through the winter. So it has changed immensely, I think, in the last 50 years. There is still a kitchen garden, but that's actually now we've turned into a vineyard, and I still grow vegetables, a small number for myself, because there is something entirely joyous about working with the land and eating what you grow. And it focuses on that link, to my mind, in where I come from, between the farm and the orchards and the table, rather than thinking food comes from a shiny shelf in a supermarket. So part of what we're always trying to do at home is get people to understand that the grain from the bread comes from that field of wheat over there. It doesn't miraculously arrive in a loaf. So part of the traditions of Highclere, looking backwards, are a little bit different for people even now to figure out and understand. Highclere had a great reputation for food, which was fantastic. And they had a French chef, so all the menus were written in French. And in the books, I've reproduced some of them in French, because that was the highest level of culinary deliciousness. And I think British cuisine was not very rated for many years. It is a lot better now. But it was, I think, regarded as stodgy and really unappetizing. And I hope we have done better in the last few decades. But we were not known as a great gastronomic experience for many of our tourists. But looking backwards before that, I think it was a little bit better. There were many courses, they were called, and they came in and you had vegetables and meat and fish, and it went on for simply ages, the entrees and the different dishes that were brought in. So I do not know how any of them kept the figures within the courses that most of them seemed to. What I found interesting is how much they walked. And if they couldn't go out and have a walk because of the rain, they walked around the dining room. So many of you have seen the dining room in Downton Abbey. And then I've got notes in the diary of the 4th Earl of Carnarvon and his wife setting off to walk around the table for half an hour in the afternoon. Very Jane Austen, perhaps, but anyway. But that was trying to make sure they always exercised. So it's interesting to me, as we're now beginning to realize we should all walk and move. We just need to figure out what our parents and grandparents did, because they probably knew a bit more. So there's both food, there's walking, there's exercise, but it's all for us about the outside world. Downton Abbey looked in, but we're always looking out for what we're bringing in, and then for also going outside after that. Downton Abbey obviously cooked food for their dining room scenes. Their dining room scenes would take 11 hours of filming in our dining room, with 1 hour set in D-rig, and they'd bring it was usually chicken in mayonnaise to look like fish in the morning, and it would sit on that table for 11 hours, so you obviously couldn't eat it. And what's more, it spoiled the continuity, because if someone had a piece of asparagus at 11 o'clock, it might look different if they were reshooting it at 3 p.m. So the whole thing was bananas, really. It must have been so boring. And they had a white cloth over the table, because they would, in between, do crosswords. And from that 11-hour filming day, they try and get 4.5 minutes for you all to watch on TV. So once they were in there, we knew they were stuck in there all day, because they'd never get it done. And there was a very nice lady outside trying to cook something which looked of a piece for 1912 or 1922. So there's the fictional world of cooking for me, and then there's the real world of cooking. And I've tried to ask some of the people from Downton Abbey, the cast and crew, to come and dine and stay with me to see that you really can eat the food in the dining room sometimes. So that's also quite fun. So in the book, I've picked 4 weekends, one with statesmen in 1866, and also touches on the creation of Canada and the Dominion of Canada by the 4th Earl. The other's royalty, There's another one with music and Malcolm Sargent, who helped create the Proms in London, which is a big music festival in August in London, and another one of how we live today and what we eat. And we do start with breakfast. You'll have to come and have breakfast, which today is still eggs and bacon or tomatoes or whatever else, when we've got friends to stay, because otherwise it would be impossible to eat like that. My husband and I like kidneys, but most of our guests don't, so we tend not to serve them. Lunch is another meal, possibly with cheese, possibly not. And then the main meal is dinner in the evening. But my focus today is on a balance of whether it's rice or potato or different carbohydrates, less of them in the evening, more fish, less meat, less of everything, lots of vegetables. And it's a reinterpretation of the old recipes with our chefs in the kitchen. And there's still actually a very good Indian curry. It's called the Highclere curry. And that was a recipe handed down orally. So to try and write it in the book
Yeah.
oh, it was a blooming nightmare, because people kept trying to make it. And my husband would say, no, not enough mango chutney, or whatever else. So I'm sure it's not a proper curry, other than that it does involve curry powder and some spices. But anyway, it's the Highclere curry. And of course, kedgeree, I think, also has a mixed tradition here, joint tradition here with India. So there's cooking stretches across the bounds of seas, of nations, of years and centuries. And that brings us all together, which is why we're all here today as well, apart from words, music and food, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Which brings me to my next question. You've described the filming of Downton Abbey, and I'm sure that the audience will want to know a little bit more about that. But it made me think, of course, Mrs. Patmore is a very famous character in Downton Abbey, and she's the cook, so...
She can't cook in real life. She can't actually boil an egg.
That's amazing. And what about the other one? I can't remember her, the assistant cook.
Daisy, she's so cute.
Yes, she's best. So I would love to know from both of you about the real-life chefs, both at Highclere as well as within the Rana kitchens. Because, of course, we think of Mrs. Patmore, but what were the real chefs like, the real Rana cooks? I'd love to think about those characters and tell the audience a little bit about the real people who actually cooked this food.
Okay, so in the Rana kitchens, it started out with just the Brahmin ladies who were called bajais, and the men were called bajes, who would be cooking all the food. And no other person of any other caste could even enter the kitchen at that stage. Slowly, of course, that practice disappeared, and other people did come in, like my husband's nanny was not a Brahmin, she was a Tamang lady. And she cooked, she learned from my grandmother-in-law, who was a fantastic connoisseur of food. And it is because of her that the love of food and passion for food and cooking is born in our Babar Mahal family. All her children cooked. She had 7, so 5 boys and 2 girls. They all cooked. They were, extremely good connoisseurs of food. They ate well. They could never tolerate a badly cooked meal. So the ladies who were cooking were these Brahmin bajais, and each would be, like specializing in one dish. It was like Ahilya Bajai would be just making the aloo tariko. This is special Rana-style fried aloo.
So there was, sorry to interrupt you, so there was one person who did one recipe.
One recipe, so all this, let's say this gathering of all these chefs would be doing their specialities.
And I bet there were a lot of fights in the kitchen.
I'm sure. Just imagine 10 women in one kitchen. I mean,
it's good that they were all doing different recipes.
We have problems with one mother-in-law and one daughter-in-law. Can you imagine 10 women in one kitchen? So Ahilya Bajai would be making the aloo tariko. There would be Kinaura Didi, who would be just preparing the fruits and the preserves, And each fruit, each segment of orange the skin was removed, the seeds were removed, they were plated beautifully in these silver platters. There used to be shared just 4 grapes with each, and just a few apples, and we thought it was so exotic. And my uncle-in-law explained to me, not exotic at all. There were hardly any fresh fruits and vegetables at that time in Nepal, so they were shared with the whole family. And then her assistant was Noor Jahan Didi. As you can see, the Didi's names and the Bajai's names were as exotic as their preparations, So they were named all these beautiful names. I'm sure they didn't come with these names when they came from the villages. But all these rosy, red, Noor Jahan, Ahilya, and then there was Chanti Bajai, who was famous for her chicken pulao. So all, this all got together and was all served in this one silver platter. So that was the preparation that went with it. I remember when my husband was born in Babarmal, so there were 100 maids and I don't know how many male retainers that went with it. So each had their specific job. One didn't interfere with the others. And when the ones were getting older, they would get younger recruits to train under them. So my husband's nanny came in at the age of 15 and she trained under my grandmother-in-law and again under other bajais. So she just absorbed the cooking and the culture and she brought it into our house. And then I realized when she was getting older, that, good Lord, one day if she's not here, this all dies with her, So that's the time I thought these recipes really need to be documented. So the food varieties were a lot. In those days, there was hunting. Nepal believed in something that was called hunting diplomacy. So King George V was invited. Archduke Ferdinand was at a shikar, hunting visit in Nepal just before his assassination. And a lot of the viceroys from England would be invited, and they would be just kept in the Tarai jungle in the south. So the Ranas were quite clever that way, keeping them away from the seat of power in Kathmandu, entertaining them, giving them all the Rana specialities and the great joys of hunting at that time. So all that went with it. Of course, now, because shikar is banned, it was the royal sport at that time. So a lot of the meat dishes were, like animals and jungle fowl and birds. So that was also on the Rana table. There were some animals which were totally taboo, and that was pork and chicken. Surprisingly, chicken. Wild boar had a great space then on the Rana table. You had to have a wild boar. For any festivity, for any occasion, a wild boar had to be there. Even his head was put on the table, like you have your suckling pig, so we would have the wild boar pig decorated, in the wild boar head on the table, and then the wild birds. And chickens weren't allowed because they pecked the dirt, so they were not supposed to be very hygienic, as in pigs. Pork was again the same because they ate dirt, so they were not very hygienic. Well, later, I think the chickens pecked their way to the tables because as shikar diminished and the wild game was not available readily. So the chicken is quite predominant now on the Rana table, but the other wild fowl and the wild game is all gone now and can be replicated with pork and mutton. In the northern areas of Nepal, you even have yak meat, which is used a lot, So yak meat, and you have the buffalo meat, which the indigenous people of the Nevars of Kathmandu, they use a lot of buffalo meat. So in my second book, I asked one of the gentlemen, why is it preferred to mutton? So he said, because that's much more healthy. And I just looked at him and I thought, this huge, big animal, how can it be more healthy than a little goat? And he said, no, it has just no fat at all. And I didn't quite believe him then, but I Googled it later, and he's right. Mutton has a lot of fat, and the buffalo meat doesn't have fat. So he said it was because of regions of health that they used the buffalo rather than the mutton. So all these interesting stories going with the old chefs and the cooks, So they slowly made their way to the Rana kitchen, and it is typically Nepali food, which is very simple, stir-fried, and a lot of tempering, not deep-fried, like our Indian counterparts. So the khansamas came from Lucknow. So that is why the Rana food is distinct in its flavor, which is being different from typical Nepali food, because it's richer. It has a lot of more oil. We use mustard oil and ghee and a lot more spices. And of course, the preparations took so long. That's what I think differentiates little royal cuisine from the normal simple cuisine, is the preparation. It takes so much longer, your longer marination hours, and you are cooking in slow firewood, clay ovens, all that, which is quite a lost art, I think, today. So all that was there involved with the cooking. And of course, the presentation that went with it. The presentation was so important. We just didn't put it out onto plates and dishes and put it on the table, the laying of the table, the silver platters that went with it, And, it had to be served beautifully. The color combinations that went with it, the spinach had to be made stir-fried just before serving. So the smell of mustard oil with the fenugreek seeds going in and the sizzling of the spinach. And it's not even cut, it's whole leaves of spinach and cooked really just before serving. So, the taste and the flavors also stayed on. So I think those layers of flavors and civilization go with the presentation of the food.
Thank you, thank you. And Fiona, can you tell us about the real life Mrs. Patmore's, who would have lived in the Downton Abbey kitchens?
Well, Mrs. Patmore, Leslie Nichol, is so nice, and she has actually come and stayed, but I think she must be a very good actor given her own cooking skills, but she certainly enjoys a party. So we still have 4 chefs today because we have tours and we're open to the public. So in the summer, in July and August, we are welcoming 1,200 people a day, and the same at Easter.
That's a lot.
And then we have different tours of different ilks, of guided tours, and on every single tour, just about, I'm including food. And interestingly enough, before COVID, people used to make their choices, and because during COVID we had to not allow people to, cross-choose or whatever, by asking people, by now preparing a different, plate for each person, it has so reduced the waste. Apparently in the Western world, we waste 30% of the food we buy. So in some ways, there are some things we had to learn in a tragic time, which are perhaps better lessons going forwards. So the kitchen is still reasonably stuffed. We don't have the still remained, which you mentioned. And
what about those bells? Do you have the bells right at the opening?
No, they don't work. I make my own coffee. Never mind. But we have great barista machines, so I'm a very good barista, so that's fine. But in 1908 or 12, when Downton started, there would have been 100 gardeners, because we're producing our own food. There would have been 60 indoor staff, so 14 footmen, 3 carsons. It was a much bigger enterprise. And 250 families living in and around with maintenance, forestry, farming, etc. So Downton Abbey represents it in a smaller way, and today it is much smaller. And sometimes on a Sunday, if we're not open, it's all quiet, and sometimes I could be on my own in the castle, and there's some blooming gutter that's blocked. So the castle is the same size. It still has 250 to 300 rooms. But instead of the 25 maintenance people from 1908, there'll be me. And I just sometimes think it is ironic that it's same bloody size, but it's just not enough people. So it's interesting. These houses were built for a different time. We're trying to adapt, figure out how to make people love them, welcome them, find their value, their culture. But at the heart of it, everybody always comes to Highclere, and I hope always eats, drinks. We have a cocktail bar, that's always good news, at Highclere. So food, the traditions, how we cook, is at the heart of it. And when I leave here, one of my first meetings when I'm back is with the chefs to try to devise some different menus for salads and things like that going forwards for when we're open to the public, to begin to look back at our traditions and see how we can do better for when people come today, with all our focus on how we can eat well, because we all tend to snack today and perhaps eat less well. So it's all those thoughts are still within all that we do today. Food.
Thank you. That's absolutely amazing to think of. So my next question is, what you're both describing is very, very elaborate food rituals. And one of the things that make a recipe royal is not just the food, but as you said, Rohini, the presentation. And in the case of Downton, the etiquette, which, the forks, the knives, the cutlery. And I remember in your book, Rohini, some of the silverware which was used to photograph it is just absolutely stunning. So tell us, how do these things take recipes and make them into royal recipes just by the presentation? What's the most elaborate form of presentation that you have seen either in the archives or in real life?
Okay, so the most elaborate, I think the platter and the presentation, is the platter which is on the cover of my book in the shape of a fish. It belongs to one of my aunt-in-laws, Mrs. Manju Rana, and her father-in-law was one of the was one of the last scions of the Ranas. And this lady called us for lunch one day. She had a normal lady's lunch. And she had these beautiful platters there that we were supposed to pick up and serve at a buffet table, serve whatever we wanted. And I looked at this fish platter. It is so beautiful and so beautifully carved. And I just looked at her and I said, Mua, this is going to be on the cover of my book. I just picked it up and I knew it then because it was so exotic. In Nepal, the fish is a symbol of good luck. It is considered very auspicious. When someone's leaving the house, when someone's entering the house, you have these big gharas of water, kept with green leaves and yogurt on top, and there's a fish. And the yogurt is sprinkled with vermilion. There's a dried fish kept on top or another fresh one. And fish is in any way considered really, really auspicious. So when I looked at it, it just resonated with me. I'm doing this. This is my first book. I didn't know anything about, I've done English honors in literature. I have a passion for cooking. I've combined both of them and come out with these books. But I thought, this is a sign. This is a sign for me that my book is going to be auspicious and it's going to be lucky for me. So that platter, when it's filled with all the typical Nepalese Rana cuisine, like the rice, it's a pulao, and there's a beautiful yogurt accompaniment to it, which is called kacha tarkari. There are 2 or 3 preparations of meat and chicken and fish. And then, of course, the range of fresh vegetables. The greens have to be there. They're old preserves, they're old achars, and of which famous one is kurke kursani, which is a green chili pickle cooked and just stored for the whole year. No Rana girl goes to her home without her bottle of kurke kursani. That is her little, emblem of I am from Nepal, and this is going to go into my food, and it's going to represent Nepal. So, and with the sweet meats, the yogurt, the fresh food, the sweet meats, all going, that elaborate presentation, I think, you just look at it, it scintillates all your 5 senses, like food is supposed to, right? It's that sense of smell, taste, your eyesight, the sound of the sizzling ghee on top of the rice, and then, of course, the mind, body, soul, all is, totally enlightened. So I think this whole, it's not one thing that can be presented well, it's the accompaniment of all these dishes, and the putting together, which takes, we just look at that platter and enjoy it. In half an hour, we are finished. But no one knows of the amount of time, the labor-intensive work that goes into preparing all these dishes. That reflects, I think, the culture and, what goes into the Rana families, the history, even what is available. So you're talking about the availability of your grains and your flora, fauna, whatever is available. You're going out to the gardens, you're going out to hunting for the meat. So this is a total representation of your culture in that one platter that you're serving people and hopefully imbibing yourselves. And then, of course, the Ranas, the Nepalese, a lot of Indians, we eat with our hands. So basically, it's a very hygienic way of eating because you wash your hands. You never know how clean your spoons and forks are when they're presented on the table. You're washing your hands before eating. And it is scientifically proven that the hand in the shape of a mudra, when you're picking up your food with your hands, that is scintillating your taste buds and is also making your nerves and all, your brain is scintillated with the taste of the food going in. And can you imagine at the end of a good meal, you're licking your fingers to keep that taste. So it all goes together, to present this food in a very palatable way, and hopefully the person imbibing it enjoys it.
Thank you. Thank you. What about you, Fiona? What's the most elaborate thing that you came across?
Well, I think any past royal visit, such as that of Edward VII, would have been the most elaborate, with the most elaborate candelabra of flowers, the most elaborate dishes, requiring the most number of chefs, and with all the backup for it as well, the never-ending rotation of dishes coming in around the table and being taken out again. So we don't put everything on a plate. Louis and his team will set the table. And depending on the numbers and everything else with the candelabra, and then the flowers, which I love to do. And then when we've sat down to bring down the water and the wines, and then the entree arrives, it's a very peaceful process. You're sitting down, talking, having conversation with someone you didn't know very well, or you did know very well, and you're catching up. It's that basis, I think, of what is humanity. It's saying, welcome to my home, and here is a delicious meal, and look, I've spent the time setting it out. So obviously some meals every day with my husband when I'm cooking are less elaborate, but nevertheless I'm going to try and make it look nice. And if it's friends staying for a weekend, it's a joy to take the time and the trouble to welcome them, because I think there's probably nothing more important than that. And we all work, I'm sure you all work, we all work very hard. So the time out, the time you give to friendship and going for walks, that is really important. And you say it's right. I mean, I think we also make a gin at home, Highclere, and you start with everything with the smell, just slowly smelling it, and then you've got the taste and the look and the sense and the sound. But it's the smell and the taste and the slowness of enjoyment rather than the rush of everyday life. We're always on our machines, rushing to do something and rushing to do something else. And I don't think we actually have more time today than we did in the past, probably less. And that is the one thing that all of us in this room don't have enough of, time. So it's precious.
That's such a beautiful way to end this session, because, as you rightly said, it's time that we have run out of, not conversation. What we're going to do is we're going to open it up for questions. And then if there is time, I have one final question for the two of you, but let's include the audience.
Ma'am?
Can we have questions and not comments, please?
Ma'am, my question is, like, what is your opinion about the foodie people? Like, they'll have tried different hacks with the
Sorry,
food.
we can't hear you. Can you speak up and speak clearly?
Ma'am, my question is that nowadays there are very foodie people, like they try different hacks with the food. What is your opinion about them?
What do you guys think about foodies? Foodies.
Foodies. I think food is, synonymous to both of us sitting here, because we've both written cookbooks. So our thoughts on foodies is, go on, eat, please. Food is the way of life, and go ahead with your being a foodie.
Thank you. Gentleman over there, and then the lady over here, and then we have one more question over here.
An earlier Earl of Carnarvon was famously discovering the tomb of Tutankhamun. And when he was there in Egypt for so many years, did he bring any Egyptian influences back to the Highclere table?
I think he was a huge traveller, the Earl of Carnarvon. So when he visited Ceylon, today's Sri Lanka, he came back with the Highclere curry, plus a Sri Lankan chef who cooked at Highclere with a monkey on his shoulder, which after a while, the monkey and the chef went back to Sri Lanka. So he did bring traditions back with him. And when he went to Egypt, he took his own French chef, his own wines, and he entertained very well. So all the archaeologists and Egyptologists wanted to go and have dinner with him. So he was able to absorb so much information. But he first went there in 1898 and obviously discovered it in 1922. So he would have been a fun man to sit next door to, although he ate very sparingly himself, but he enjoyed Turkish cigarettes and he was asthmatic.
So not vice versa.
Thank you.
He took English traditions, but not Egyptian back to England.
I don't think he particularly, I mean, he thoroughly enjoyed the cuisine, but not particularly. He ate very plain food because he was quite an invalid for much of his life. He'd had so many car accidents. He was one of the earliest car drivers without either a seatbelt or a roll bar, so he nearly killed himself several times. He was about 5'10", and in his diaries, he said he was hard put sometimes to get his weight above 9 stone. I don't know what that is in kilograms, but you know what? It's a lot less than I weigh.
We have time for one last question.
So first of all, congratulations on your books. My question to you is, thank you for sort of keeping alive these, delicious age-old recipes and traditions. But equally important, do you think it's important to let go of some of the sort of harmful old traditions, such as patriarchy, the gender-based violence that comes along with it? And can women in your position do something, like take affirmative action, to, let's say, prevent or stop gender-based violence and these sorts of practices, maybe in your families? Perhaps for the speaker from Nepal?
Okay, so we are talking about old recipes and traditions.
Yes.
And culture, which is, we have documented to preserve for another time, and for this is a seat of knowledge. Anyone who reads them reads about that time and what happened at that time, right? So the ladies were very much in control of whatever they were doing and had a very, very important position in their households. They were the centrifugal forces of the families. So we have written, at least I have written to the traditional Rana Cook Book and the 10 ethnic communities of Nepal in the Nepal Cook Book. And in my books, women are venerated. They are the centrifugal forces of their family. Thank you.